Hey, what's going on everybody? It's your bro, hope you're doing well, and in this video I'm going to explain the differences between let and var in JavaScript, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Alright everybody, we're going to discuss the differences between let and var. These are two different ways in which we can declare a variable. Let was introduced as of ECMAScript 2015, also known as ES6. Basically speaking, this is a JavaScript standard meant to ensure the interoperability of web pages across different web browsers. I stole that quote from Wikipedia. When we declare a variable, that variable will have a certain scope. A scope is where a variable is accessible. If we declare a variable using let, that variable will have a block scope. If we use var, that variable will instead have a function scope. And these two scopes behave differently. Let's say that we have a for loop. I will declare my index I using the let keyword. Let I equal 1, and we will just count up to 3. We'll continue this for loop as long as I is less than or equal to 3, then increment our index by 1. Within this for loop, I'll just display whatever our index I is. So if we use this let keyword, we're going to declare our variable I with a block scope. This variable is not going to be accessible outside of this block of code. So let's try it. I'm going to display whatever I is outside of this for loop, outside of this block. So console.log I, and we should have an uncaught reference error. I is not defined. That's because we used this let keyword. We're declaring I with a block scope. It's not going to be recognized outside of this block of code. However, if we use var, well then the scope is going to be different. This variable I now has a function scope. It's going to be available throughout the entire program unless we're inside of a function, hence the name function scope. Now, if you were to take a look within my console, we have the numbers 1 through 4 this time. That's because I still contains a value even outside of this for loop, since we declared I using var and not let. So since we used var, this variable I has a function scope. It's available throughout the entire program, unless we're inside of a function, but we'll cover that momentarily. And that's one of the reasons that we tend to use let instead of var within a for loop, because when we exit this for loop, we do not want I to still contain a value in case we need to reuse it. Now, var does have a limit. It's limited to a function if it is within one. If not, then it's available throughout the entire program. It has a global scope. So let's say that our for loop is within a function. Let's create a function named do something, and it's going to execute our for loop. So let's place our for loop within this function, and I'm just going to call this function do something. Okay, so we have the numbers 1 through 3. We declared I using var, but I is not recognized. It's not accessible outside of this function. So if your variable is declared using var, it's going to have a function scope. It's going to be available throughout the entire program unless it's within a function. Now, one of the major reasons that we should consider transitioning from using var to let is because a variable declared with var can override something behind the scenes. For example, when we load our web browser, there is a window object behind the scenes, and we can access it by going to console, then type window, then enter. So this window object has a bunch of built-in properties and methods, and if we declare a variable using var that shares the same property name or function, we may accidentally override one of these important functions or properties. For example, let's say that we have a variable name. That's a simple enough variable. Well, there's also a name property within our window object. So let's say that I'm not aware of what this window object is or what it does. So I'm just going to type var name and type in my name. Let's save, head back to our window object, hit enter, and find that name property. Oh, would you look at that? We have accidentally overridden this name property of our window object with the name variable from our JavaScript program when we did not intend to do so. This time, let's declare name using let instead of var and see what happens. So you may need to close out of your web browser so that it refreshes. I'm just going to save and then open with live server and then go back to my console. So go to console, type window, then enter, find name, and you can see that this time we did not override this property of name. That's because we used let instead of var. Well, those are the main differences between let and var. Let has a block scope, and var has a function scope. In future videos, I'm going to begin declaring variables using let in place of var, now that we understand the differences between the two. So if you would like a copy of this code, I will post this to the comments section down below. But yeah, those are the main differences between let and var in JavaScript.